This video is talking about a Dead by Daylight rebalance from this from the homie Cany0.5, which is somebody that we have not actually watched before here on the channel. So when it's somebody very fresh and new that we have not watched before, more so than ever, make sure that you go like and subscribe. I just posted the link in the chat. It'll be in the description down below for YouTubers. But yeah, especially when it's something new, it's more pertinent that you guys actually go out and like and support the official release of the video. So make sure you do that real quick. But yeah, let's go and see this person's idea of how to rebalance Dead by Daylight.
One goal with this rebalance: to get rid of camping and tunneling. The reason for the title is because removing camping and tunneling has massive implications for the rest of the game's balance. And if you just remove those things, then Killer's win rate will plummet. Seeing as I want the game balanced, I feel compelled to include a bunch of other changes to bring Killer up to the power of survivors, since camping and tunneling is a main reason why high-level killers can even compete with high-level survivors currently. Well, you know, excluding a few outliers like Nurse or overpowered add-ons. So before you freak out about a single change in this video and say that it will make Killer overpowered or it'll make Survivor overpowered, you should consider it under the context of every change I'm suggesting. Oh, also, this is only a rebalance of the base game mechanics. That means I didn't include killer perks or map changes in this rebalance because 1, that would be way too much for one video on my side channel, and 2, with big goals like removing camping, I think it's more important to address base game mechanics that affect every single match before moving on to the massive amount of variables.
I'll say this before we get too deep into the video. The problem with camping and tunneling is not so much camping and tunneling as a concept. It's just that there's no way to keep it out of the hands of somebody using it to kind of enact a surprise comp game at 4 or 5 gens versus people using it to catch up when a team is playing extremely sweaty on the survivor side. And trying to strike that balance where you take it out of the hands of somebody doing the former versus the latter has always been the difficulty.
In all the matches, here goes.
We saw this.
I've stated from the start, camping has got to go. So when the killer hooks a survivor, instead of staying on the hook, that survivor will now get pulled underground. Once the survivor is underground, other survivors must dig them out. And yes, that means survivors can no longer unhook themselves, which will obviously call for a bunch of perk reworks like Deliverance. There will be multiple mounds scattered across the map, and survivors will see the auras of mounds that are closest.
I mean, it's like thematic, right? It's thematic to have them buried because that kind of fits the horror aesthetic. Let's see how it works functionality.
Survivors can go to any mound and start digging their teammate out of the ground. Digging will take a bit of time, indicated by a progress bar. I don't know what a good amount of time would be to make it a balance, but it shouldn't be nearly as fast as unhooking currently is. Oh, and another survivor can help with digging to speed up the process. Once the survivor starts digging, other survivors can see the aura of the mound that is being worked on as a different color, and all of the other mound's auras will disappear unless there's more than one survivor underground at a time. In cases where multiple survivors are underground, they can be dug out just like...
I want to point out directly, too, is that this has a lot of similarities to how Pyramid Heads' cages already work. Like, when he cages somebody, they go cross-map instead of being, like, just right there for the killer to camp or prepared to tunnel. Now there's some travel time there, but as long as they don't know where this is happening across the map, this would do a lot to prevent that.
Normal, but will have to be done one by one in the order that they were hooked. For example, if 2 survivors are underground at one time, the survivor who starts digging first will dig out the survivor that was hooked first. And if the other survivor who isn't hooked starts digging at a different mound, then that survivor will be digging to rescue the survivor that was hooked second. Now, let's go through these changes again, but from the killer's perspective. Once a killer hooks a survivor and that survivor gets pulled underground, the survivor's icon will go from downed to injured. Yes, that's right, the killer will no longer see a hooked icon for any survivors. They will still have death icons to see what survivors they killed, but no more hook icons. This means that perks like Devour Hope or Make Your Choice will obviously need rework.
I don't know if I like that. I get the idea is that, like, you have to physically be present to understand if an unhook has happened, so killers don't beeline it back to the hook. I understand that that's, like, the rationale that they're going for, but, like, that's really, really important for killers understanding the flow of the match and if they are needing to enact more pressure or enact less pressure. A lot of my decision making based on whether I need to like enact more pressure or not is based on knowing if somebody's on the hook. So that I'm not keen on.
Works. Once a survivor is dug out of a mound, the killer will get no notification. Not a noise notification, not an icon notification.
I agree with no noise notification, because that's kind of like the problem that we're facing with Pyramid and the PTB, is because even though he cages them super far away, he gets the noise notification, so he can just beeline it over to where they are and then inflict form it with his M2 and just tunnel that guy. So I agree with that, but not with the icon.
No notification whatsoever. Survivors who are digging also have their auras hidden. This way, killers with aura reading perks will not know where a survivor is being dug up. When I said the goal was to remove hook camping, I actually meant it.
And
also, hooks no longer break when survivors die on them. That's just an ancient mechanic that will no longer be necessary because survivors can unhook other survivors anywhere across the map, not just at that single hook, so why would we want to keep that in the game? So no reason for survivors to break hooks when they die on them. Seeing these changes will probably make you come to the conclusion that killers will no longer hook survivors and they'll just make them bleed out on the ground instead because, you know, they can defend people on the ground, but I've accounted for that. All survivors can now pick themselves up from the dying state. No perk required. Luckily, Behavior already tried demoing these changes, so even though I've had these changes in my head for a long time before that PTB, it'll be more...
I know you can't see because our chat's in the way, but look, there's Leo. Leo's in Nonsense chat. Yeah, we discussed over and over why this is not a good idea, because it makes super strong killers like Blight and Nurse unaffected, but it makes weaker killers like Myers and Clown way weaker if they could just pick themselves up, because slugging is one of the few things that weaker killers in the game could do to catch up and kind of mitigate the fact that their base kit is fairly weak. But obviously if the rage gets up, they can't slug. So
palatable for you guys because Behavior already showed the potential of it. Oh, and the other changes that they made in that PTB, like the Mori stuff, I'll assume is also implemented alongside my changes. So take that into account with this video. Although recovering from the dying state will take longer
There's
than
a reason
it
we
is
abandoned
in
that.
live. Maybe double the time or something. These changes aren't down to an exact science, and all of the numbers regarding time or progress bars can and should be tweaked. Since survivors can pick themselves up, I can see that you'll think that killers will still just camp them because they can hit survivors as soon as they recover. And no, I'm not just going to suggest Soul Guard be base kit. My solution is that survivors will no longer bleed out as they are recovering. Sure, this doesn't change anything about the ability of killers to camp survivors who are on the ground, but it changes the viability. The design principle is that killers should never be able to win or get kills by defending a single spot. With these changes, survivors can just keep going through the cycle of recovering and getting downed, but eventually their teammates will finish gens since the killer is doing nothing to stop them, and the down survivors can just crawl out of the gates and still have 4 minutes.
That's 4 minutes. The bleed out timer is 4 minutes. If you guys like, that's a long time. That's a long time to be sitting there. I feel like that's its own kind of deterrent. Four whole minutes. That's a long time. That's a lot of progress out in the background.
To do so. If killers want to kill down survivors, they will have to pick them up and hook them. It goes without saying, but the perks that are affected while you're downed, like Tenacity or No Mither, will obviously need changes or reworks. From now on, I'm not going to mention perks in this video, so just assume any suggested change I make that conflicts with perks will mean that the affected perks get adjusted or reworked accordingly.
That's all.
Okay, well, we've removed most of the ways that killers can stop survivors from playing the game, but what about body blocking? Sometimes, in very rare instances, killers can body block survivors in corners forever, and those scenarios would break my stated design principle. A pretty easy solution is that while survivors have crows flying overhead, they can phase through the killer. No longer will a killer be able to get kills by defending a single spot.
That would hurt me in
sitting at a
modern
single
DBD
spot
right now.
for an extended period of time. That's just impossible.
Like that, you can put that in the game right now with no adjustments.
With these changes, camping is gone. Now let's address tunneling. During a match, all 4 survivors will share the 12 hook states.
So all 4 survivors will only die in hook states 9, 10, 11,
Why the long
and
pause?
12.
Why the long pause? This is eerie.
And yes, that means that a single survivor can be hooked up to 9 times in a match. Now, before you freak out
Wow.
and call this overpowered for the killer, since the killer can just chase the weak link most of the match, remember that the killer would have to find that weak link every time that survivor gets hooked and dug up, which would probably mean that the killer lost because he kept wasting time looking for a single survivor instead of just defending gens. And take note that in the current iteration of Dead by Daylight, if you have a weak link teammate that gets tunneled early, you pretty much lost anyway. This change doesn't make weak survivors negatively affect your team any more than they did before. Also, before you say this is overpowered for Survivor, remember what I said at the start of the video, and keep in mind that, with shared hook states, you don't have to chase the best looper who's near the best loops to progress the game. Hooking any survivor will hurt the survivors who are at the most powerful positions in each map, since hooks are now a shared resource. This change also allows for the number of hooks to be balanced by increments of 1 instead of 4. So the devs could tweak the total hook numbers to be 7, 10, 25, or whatever other number, instead of being forced to have total hook numbers divisible by 4. Okay, so when survivors are underground, what happens with the hook states? Like, what's the relationship there? Just like before, they'll chug through hook states if they're not rescued fast enough. Also, the hook state timer will be faster than it is now, which is 60 seconds. Maybe twice as fast or something, since survivors aren't spending a lot of time walking to mounds.
I don't know. It just doesn't seem like, I know, like, because like it's like he's saying it like, oh well, the mound thing fixes the killer coming back to hook situation, but it doesn't, because we watched that happen with Pyramid Head. We did it today with Pyramid Head and the PTB, where we just went back to the cage, and obviously there's no bubble there, so I'd have to like find them. But like if I know generally where, like, even without the bubble, well, we didn't even get the bubble most of the time, right, Chad? Like in that match we played today, we didn't use the bubble to go back to them. We just kind of like went where they vaguely were, because we know where the cages go. So like we didn't really use the bubble to do the things we did today, where we're like, hey, can we tunnel using the new M2 ability of Pyramid Head? Like that, he's saying that like it's like, oh well, this just defeats this, and it's like, no, not really, not necessarily, no.
As they're always located nearby. Oh, and struggling skill checks are no more.
When survivors are pulled underground, they'll spectate other survivors until they're rescued or killed.
Hook camping is impossible. Survivors can't be tunneled out after just 3 hooks, and they can also recover from the dying state. So what does the killer get to compensate for all of these survivor buffs? Well, killer gets Ruin as base kit. No, it's not tied to a hex anymore. It's active for the entire match. And again, as with a lot of other changes, the numbers could be tweaked for how much it passively regresses.
What does this have to do with anything else?
Regressing generators no longer spark, which means you won't get free info by looking at generators to see if they're sparking or not.
But
gens
why?
Can still be kicked, and they'll spark like before until survivors get back on them. So sparking generators aren't indicators that those gens are regressing, just that they've been kicked. With Ruin base kit,
why? But why though? Like, beside, like, what does this have to do with, like, I don't know how this. What? Okay.
The strategy to 3-gen will become oppressive and overpowered, and there are some cases where it's already like that right now. So once the 3rd generator has been completed, the 2 generators that were completed first will break and they'll need to be repaired again. But that doesn't mean that you need to repair 2 more generators. That just means that you have 2 more generators able to be repaired. So basically, when there's 2 generators left for survivors to complete, there will be 6 gens on the map. No more 3-genning. Killers will actually have to chase survivors and not just patrol between 3 close.
Survivor biased? It kind of does. It kind of does. Which they're trying their best to fix a lot of the problems that are on the survivor side, but it doesn't seem like, hey, we'll just give killer Ruin. It really like mitigates all the stuff that's going to be happening on the other side. Yeah, also it's very complicated. Yeah, you're right, Flo. It's very complicated. So like the person, like a casual player loading into this probably would be very befuddled and not know what's going on.
Close gens that regress back to 0 every time survivors are forced to get off of them. Oh, and speaking of chases, killers are going to be stronger, and a lot of them with this upcoming change. The killer's red stain is now removed forever. I know that in the current version of DBD you can
That's going to make looping so much more difficult. I thought what you were trying to do was preserve the fun aspect of DBD, which is not, camping, tunneling, 3-genning, which means people are going to be out there playing with each other and chasing more often. You said that just a second ago. Killers going to have to actually end up chasing the survivors. permanent undetectable for everyone? Well, not permanent undetectable, but no red stain for everyone all the time? That's like, you know how much survivors rely on that to loop? You know how much killers, mind games they have to do to like mitigate that? Dude, some people's ghost face literally go undetectable just to lose the red stain to do a mind game, and it works a lot. Oh,
just moonwalk and avoid showing your stain around corners, but that forces you to not see the survivors you're chasing. Also,
brother, if you have problems moonwalking, that's moonwalking is like something I learned in like my first like 100 hours of playing this game. Yeah, how are you having? Anyways.
moonwalking just looks silly. Sure, there are a lot of funny things that players could do to make their killers look silly, but those are all intentionally done by the players with the express purpose of making the killer look silly. I don't think that the killer should have to perform a maneuver that makes him look wacky while they're trying their hardest to kill you. The red stain just shouldn't be in the game. If survivors want to know where the killer is looking, they should be looking at the killer to get that information.
But what about when they're coming around corners? You can't just look at them when they're behind the wall, stupid. While they're literally 15% faster than you. So if you don't notice that right away, it's just a free hit.
Survivors have a
Not even
third-person
counting for
perspective
abilities.
anyways, so they don't have to be visible to the killer if they want to see what direction the killer is facing. No more red stain. Last compensation buff for killers is that the exit gate levers regress now. They'll do it pretty fast, kind of like hemorrhage fast. Survivors can no longer have the best of both worlds by 99ing exit gate levers.
99 exit gates is only there to like stop Blood Warden. They would realistically just pop the doors if it weren't for Blood Warden. I know there's also the you know, it buys you more time to get the saves, but realistically, most of the time, like out of all this, like this whole month that I've played DBD, I've had to leave a person behind on hook because of the endgame collapse probably once or twice. Probably once or twice. And that's it. That's the only time endgame collapse has forced me to leave a survivor behind in like the past month.
As a survivor, you could just stand by the lever and keep pulling it to keep the progress bar close to 99%, but eventually the killer will get close and force you to choose to open it or to let it go and run away, thereby making it regress to 0. By its nature,
yeah, like
Dead by Daylight operates
really
where
good.
the killer gets stronger as the match progresses because of a multitude of factors like killer powers gaining strength and survivors losing resources. But once gens are completed, survivors have the advantage usually, and that doesn't sit right with me. So with exit gate levers regressing, endgame collapse will happen a lot more often and give killers the endgame pressure that they deserve. Alright, that's all of my suggested base game changes, so let's look at an overview of this rebalance. When hooked, survivors get pulled underground where they can be rescued by other survivors at multiple spots. Hooked survivors' status icon will appear as injured to the killer. Killers will get no notifications when survivors are dug up. Hooks no longer permanently break. Survivors can pick themselves up from the dying state, although it'll take longer. Survivors will no longer bleed out while recovering from the dying state. Survivors lose collision when they have crows flying over their heads. Hook states are shared between all 4 survivors in a match. Hook state timers are shorter. Generators regress by default when they aren't being repaired. Generators that are regressing by default don't spark. When survivors have to repair 2 more generators to power the exit gates, there will be 6 generators available to be repaired. Killer's red stain is removed. Exit gate levers regress. And again, I don't think these changes would work well at all if they were implemented one at a time. These changes are pretty much a package deal and require one another in order to be properly balanced.
DBD extremely confusing.
So, to the people who think it's impossible to remove camping and tunneling from Dead by Daylight,
I like how he referred to Scott, and Scott's the one that went through his video.
Has your
like,
opinion been changed yet?
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. As a matter of fact, yeah, I feel like I agree with what somebody else was saying earlier. It's like you're making a whole new game at that point. You're not trying to you're not trying to make like a game, a balanced version of the game we currently play. You're trying to make like a different game. And a lot of these, like we talked about, are going to I mean, the fact that you even have to like refer to the changes you're making to killer as killer compensation clearly shows that like what side is going to be, you know, getting the better end of all this. And it's clearly not going to be the killer end of things. Clearly not going to be the killer into things. Clearly. Remind me of last year. Yeah, it sounds like you're trying to make a different game, which is, you know, okay, as like a competition sort of thing or something like that. But in terms of like to this game, no. I feel like what Behavior's idea of like an anti-camp tool is very simple, and it may not work necessarily until we like get into a PTB and are able to test it. But like the reason that is always way better is because it's very minimal. It doesn't really upset the balance of the game very much. It's just like, here, there's tiny little thing sprinkled on that preserves the main gameplay loop and doesn't require players to relearn basically a whole new video game. It's very minor. So when you go in and you make this giant sweeping change, you know, it's like, it's gonna like create a lot of confusion, and I don't even think it fixes the problems you think it does, because like people were pointing out earlier, especially with your mound idea and people being buried, like this already kind of exists in DBD in the form of like pyramid heads cages, and those are not yeah, as we found out, especially today when we tested in the PTB, that does not obviously circumvent the problems that camping and tunneling have. Yeah, like some of these, like no, like I don't even get like no red stain period, just every killer has like half of undetectable constantly. Like that's just gonna make looping very miserable. Like it'll be fun for killer, but it'll be miserable. Like it's just, I don't get it. Like I don't understand. I really just don't. You find because they're just gonna pre-draw? Yeah, because that's what they're gonna do. You're gonna get a lot of new players with that. A lot of new players will panic and like get hit, but like most of the time players are just gonna pre-drop to avoid the uncertainty. Players will just start pre-dropping to avoid the uncertainty. Or yeah, or camp and let the palette validation do its thing. I feel like this is one of the funny things about, that's one of the funny things about whenever people make a hey, I fixed camping and tunneling video, or hey, I fixed this major DBD issue, is like the reason there hasn't been like kind of like a huge sweeping solution to this, like to these problems in the game. It's because it's difficult, because like it is very hard to you know, get all of the intricacies of Dead by Daylight in one package, and then make a very small change, a very non-complicated change that like fixes all these things, that puts a band-aid on so many different things. So like there's very clearly a reason that it hasn't been fixed, and we're gonna try one of those. We're gonna try one of these fixes soon with the anti-camping thing that Behavior is releasing. But that's when people come out with videos like this where they're like changing the entire video game into something different, like you guys are saying, it's making it into a whole new game, and it upsets. It's literally just a whole new game at that point. Like if you have to change 12 main gameplay core loops in the entire perks roster on both sides, like all of the perks that are in the game, you got to change them as well. Like you're making a different game. And there's certainly no way that it works. Like, there's certainly no way that it would even remotely be possible. And that's what most people miss when they're trying to do like changes like this. So yeah.